With disappointing sales and a replacement that is the exact opposite of what it stood for, the iPhone mini kind of seems like a failure. But why does it seem like some people can't shut up about how great it is? I've been using my iPhone 13 mini now for well over a year, and today I want to help you find out whether or not this is the right device for you in 2023 depending on your needs. First up, let me give you a short conclusion up front to save you some time if you're just here for that. Overall, this is my favorite smartphone ever and I absolutely loved it, and that's also part of the reason why I haven't upgraded this year. You just can't underestimate how nice it is to have such a small and light smartphone in your day-to-day life. It is especially nice if you're someone who doesn't consume a lot of content on their phone or doesn't really use their phone to get real work done, so like answering a bunch of emails all the time and stuff like that. If you're someone that doesn't really like to use their phone all of the time, this is probably the perfect smartphone for you. It is really like the most digital minimalism friendly smartphone, if you will. It feels almost nostalgic and so refreshing to have such a small device that can accomplish so many things. It really reminds me of like the iPhone 5, 5S era, where smartphones were just always able to fit in one hand, and Apple really had that philosophy, and this is kind of going back to that but with an all-screen design and modern technology in it. So I don't know, in general it's just a really nice device and I really enjoy it a lot, but I think you have to be the right person for it. So let's dive into the pros and cons and I will tell you more about that. And after, I will talk about the size a little bit so you can figure out whether or not you will be able to make this work in your day-to-day life. First up, let's talk about the cons, and since we're now in 2023 and the next iPhones will probably have a USB-C port on them, at least according to rumors, and Apple kind of being forced to do that by the EU, I think it's a con that this is still charging with Lightning, especially if you're maybe watching this video in September or later when the new iPhones with presumably USB-C will have come out. Yeah, I don't really like Lightning, but then again, I would still use Lightning to charge my AirPods. So yeah, I would always have to bring a Lightning cable anyway, but in general, I don't like Lightning on this. Next up, it also doesn't have ProMotion or 120 Hz, which if you compare to the iPhone 13 Pro or 14 Pro, those have that. That just means that the display is refreshing at only 60 Hertz, so 60 times per second compared to 120 times, which makes it seem less fluent compared to the newer models. I have to say that even though I switched to this from the iPhone 13 Pro Max because that was just too heavy for me, it took like maybe 2-3 days to kind of get used to the 60 Hertz again. I feel like 120 Hz is really nice, but at the same time, I don't notice it if I'm constantly using a 60 Hz device, if you know what I mean. So it's more like hedonic adaptation to 120 Hz, and after that, everything else feels slow if you first use it. But if you're actually really used to 60 Hz, it's not really a negative. Next up, the same is kind of the battery. For me, it's really enough, and I've never really felt like it wasn't enough, but still, if you compare this to any other iPhone that has come out recently, the battery on those will be better, so I still wanted to put that in here. Of course, you can always make it last longer if you just take one of the small MagSafe batteries. I talked about those in an earlier video already, and I do that whenever I'm traveling. Honestly, most of the time I don't really end up using the MagSafe battery because it's like it lasts long enough, but in general, whatever phone I have, I always take a power bank or a small battery pack with me when I'm traveling, just because I'm taking a lot of pictures, I'm navigating a lot. I don't really know where I'm going, so I want to have my phone and I want to be sure that it will have batteries. So yeah, that is not really a con to the Mini specifically. Next up, the speakers are really not that great, especially if you compare to like a 13 or 14 Pro. Of course, that depends on how often you actually use your smartphone speakers, but for me, I do it from time to time just because sometimes it might be too annoying to connect my smartphone to the HomePods, which that is an entirely different story altogether. But then I just play like podcasts from my smartphone, and I would sometimes wish for it to sound a little fuller and louder as well. And last but not least, it doesn't have the most modern camera hardware. I just want to put that in here, not because I think the cameras are not great. In fact, they will actually be in the Pro section as well. But I just want to point out that if you're looking for a new iPhone in 2023, this is kind of 2 generations behind. It has the camera sensor of the 12 Pro Max, and both the 13 Pro and the 14 have a better sensor, as well as the 14 Pro, which has an even newer sensor. So you are not getting the most modern camera hardware here. Whether or not that matters, we will talk about that later. In general, like putting together all the cons, I would say that it is just not the best device if you're a smartphone power user that really uses their smartphone for everything and films a lot maybe on their smartphone, plays games, stuff like that. Then this is probably not the device for you, but honestly, you wouldn't probably even be looking at this device if that's you. Okay, let's get into the pros. For me, the biggest pro has to be the weight. It's just such a light smartphone, and that is so nice compared to other modern smartphones, especially the Pro iPhones recently, like the 13 Pro, 14 Pro. They're so heavy, and if you hold them in one hand, it kind of feels like you're straining your pinky in a weird way. And this doesn't do that, so it's just way better to hold in your hand. And not only that, but also the size and I guess one-handability of this smartphone is just so nice in day-to-day use. It's so great to just be able to do everything with one hand without really having to do any of those weird finger acrobatics that sometimes required with even the smaller 12 Pro, 13 Pro, 14 Pro size. Also, the cameras are still great, and I don't really see a lot of differences with the main camera in good lighting. So I think the benefits are more in like the Pro RAW mode, which I don't use because I don't have it on this, and also in low light where the bigger sensor really can like show its strength. But in general, the pictures, to me, they look really similar to 14 Pro and 14 or 13 Pro pictures. I think that is because so much of smartphone images is just the computational photography and the processing of the image. That's why, honestly, I don't really like smartphone images, because they look a little bit over-processed sometimes. But that also means that there's not the biggest difference just because one smartphone has like a newer sensor. So I would say in general, the cameras on this are still very nice, especially if you're coming from an older phone like the iPhone 11 or earlier. I also really like the design of this phone. I love the aluminium frame that just looks so good because it's matte compared to like the stainless steel frame on the Pro iPhones, which means that it just doesn't really attract fingerprints, and it's lighter, and yeah, I think it just looks really good in the midnight color. And in general, I think it also just has this cool factor of having this really small smartphone that still has all the modern technology, as I said, like an almost all-screen design and stuff like that. There's just nothing like this on the market today. Last but not least, the price is also really good for a modern iPhone, and I think it's one of the cheapest modern iPhones you will be able to get. That being said, I wouldn't get it for that reason, just because if you're deciding between this and the iPhone 13 maybe, the price difference will not be that huge, but in the long run, if you pick the wrong size, you will really regret it. Okay, so those were all the pros for me, but I don't think that there were any huge surprises for you in there because it's all pretty basic stuff. So let's get into the big topic here. Is it too small, and do I regret getting the smaller iPhone after more than a year? And I have to say that I was pretty scared going into this because I have fairly large hands, but even after more than a year, I have to say that I still really love this size, and I will be very sad to go to a bigger iPhone when I have to. In general, I have to say that you get used to the size and you get used to it more quickly than you think. At least that was my experience. So I was very worried, especially about typing, but I have to say that all of that has gone away. Overall, you can just do all the same things you have done with your smartphone before. It's just a little bit smaller and more convenient to hold in your hand. So all of this like worrying of making a mistake and like FOMO of going with a smaller phone and maybe regretting it later hasn't really been an issue for me. Of course, I think that for consuming content and for writing out longer texts, maybe I tend to use my iPad or MacBook a bit more often, but honestly, I have done that before as well, just because I like typing on a keyboard more than I like typing on my phone. So I don't know, if you're not the kind of person that does everything on their phone and their phone is kind of their main computer where you organize everything, which for me, that never was the way I used my phone, then I'm pretty sure that you can be okay with just the iPhone mini. At least in my experience, that was what it was like. That being said, if you are this kind of person that does everything on their phone, maybe then this will not be the right device for you. Also, if you do a lot of gaming, I think the size will be really bad, but I haven't really tried it out, since if I do any gaming on a mobile device, it will be my iPad. So all in all, maybe if you're worried about like making the wrong choice and having regrets down the line because you went with a small smartphone instead of like a normal size smartphone, I have to say that that has not been the case for me at all, even though I had these exact same worries before. And so I think that if you are not a power user, and you will know if you are one, then you will be fine with this and you will probably love the size just as much as me. Alright, so let's wrap this up and let me give you some final thoughts at the end. Overall, I love this smartphone, and it's like my favorite smartphone ever because it is so unique and such a nice experience to own day to day. Of course, I will upgrade again at some point because I think the camera improvements will just be too good at some point that I think I wouldn't be able to say no anymore. But I will be pretty sad to give this up because it's just so nice to have this small of a device, and having to go to a larger size because they don't make this one anymore is kind of unfortunate. So I will definitely miss this once I have to give it up, but for now I'm still enjoying it. So if you're looking to buy a modern iPhone right now, but you feel like all of the newer iPhones are just maybe a little bit too large or heavy, I would definitely give this one a shot because I think it's still going to be supported for a long while, and you will have a lot of fun with it in the meantime. It is just so nice to use a smartphone that is this small and this light, and I definitely recommend it to anyone that is curious about it. Alright, that's been it for this video. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.